What would you do if the most dangerous man alive was the only one standing between your child and death? Not a soldier, not a police officer, not someone with a badge and a chain of command and a supervisor who knew his name. A man whose name had never appeared in a courtroom, because no one who could testify against him had ever survived long enough to do it. That kind of man. The kind of man about whom other dangerous men spoke carefully, in lowered voices, in rooms they had swept for listening devices. And somehow, on a freezing Tuesday night in the middle of one of the busiest train stations in Eastern Europe, a 5-year-old girl in a red coat walked straight up to him, sat down on the bench beside him, took his hand, and asked if he was lost too. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button now and stay until the very last line, because this story doesn't just have a twist. It has the kind of ending that will make you sit quietly for a few minutes after it's over and look out the window and think about what it means to be found by the right person at exactly the right moment. If you've been here before, you already know. We do not do filler. Every sentence in this story is load-bearing. Let's go. His name was Domen, and he was not a man who got lost. He had memorized the layout of Kralov Central Station within 40 seconds of walking through its main entrance. The way he memorized every space he moved through. 14 cameras, 3 in the main concourse, 4 above the ticketing desks, the 2 near the east corridor bathrooms that were angled poorly and would capture the back of a person's head but not their face, 4 exit corridors, plus a 5th that most people didn't know about. An unofficial maintenance passage behind the postal kiosks that the station's own security staff used when they needed to move a situation without drawing attention to it. Rael had found it within 3 minutes of arrival, by watching where the cleaners went when they weren't cleaning. He sat on bench 17 because it faced the main hall, offered a partial sightline to 3 exits, was positioned close enough to a crowd that anyone approaching him would be visible for at least 6 seconds before they could close the distance. He wore a gray wool coat, unbuttoned at the collar despite the cold, because a buttoned collar slows you down by approximately 1 second, and 1 second had mattered before. His hands rested loosely on his knees. He looked, to anyone passing, like a man waiting for a train. He was not waiting for a train. His phone had vibrated 14 times in the last 8 minutes. He did not look at it. The men who were calling him were connected to something called the Meridian Group, a name that appeared in no publicly accessible document, and in several that were classified well above the threshold most people knew existed. These men had one message, repeated across multiple numbers in rotating cycles. The list had been updated. The target had been elevated to priority. The operational window was narrowing, and Rael was already on site, and what was he waiting for? He already knew all of this, and he had known before the first call. He had been sitting on bench 17 for 43 minutes, and somewhere around minute 22, he had made a decision that he had not yet fully acknowledged to himself. The decision sat in him the way unexploded things sit. Present, pressurized, waiting for the moment when it could no longer be treated as hypothetical. He was not going to do it. He didn't yet know what the full cost of that decision would be. He knew it would be significant. He just knew. And then the girl appeared. She came from the direction of the east platform, moving against the flow of commuters who were all rushing somewhere in the particular urgent way of people who have decided that winter is something to be gotten through rather than experienced. She was small, 5 years old, though he wouldn't learn that until later, and she wore a red wool coat that was slightly too large for her. The collar turned up around her ears the way adults wear collars, not the way children are usually dressed. Her dark hair was in 2 braids that were slightly uneven in a way that suggested she had done them herself that morning. She carried a small backpack shaped like a turtle, rounded shell, stubby legs, a small embroidered face on the front. And she walked with the specific, purposeful gait of someone who is not wandering, not drifting, not lost in the slow, unfocused way of a child who has simply misplaced an adult. She was looking for something. And then she found it. She walked directly to bench 17, stopped in front of him, and looked at him. He looked up. She studied him the way children study things they find genuinely interesting. completely openly, making no effort to disguise her assessment, which in his experience was something adults had trained themselves out of and were worse off for. She looked at his hands first, then at the tattoo that extended above his shirt collar on the left side of his neck, then at his face. Her expression was not afraid. It was considering. She said, "Are you lost too?"
Are you lost too?
Rael Domen had been asked many questions under many circumstances. He had been asked questions in rooms with the lights off. He had been asked questions by men who believed that the person asking held all the power and were consistently surprised by the error. He had never, in 15 years of doing what he did, he'd been asked this particular question by a 5-year-old in a turtle backpack on the bench he had chosen because it offered optimal threat visibility. He said, "Why would I be lost?" She pointed to his hands. "Because you're sitting very still. My mother says people sit very still when they don't know what to do next." He looked at his hands. She was not wrong. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mira." "And where is your mother, Mira?" For the first time, the confidence in her face shifted, not collapsed, shifted, like a weather system changing just slightly. "That's what I'm trying to find out," she said. "She was at the flower kiosk. And then I turned around and she was just gone." His phone vibrated again in his coat pocket. He turned it over on the bench beside him, face down, and said, "Show me where." The central flower kiosk was positioned at the intersection of the main concourse and the east corridor. A good spot for selling flowers and a better spot for watching who moved between them. The older woman running it was currently engaged in straightening a bucket of carnations with the focused attention of someone who has decided that noticing nothing is the safest policy. Rael understood why within 4 seconds of approaching. The 2 men standing near the coffee cart 18 meters away were not waiting for coffee. They wore matching charcoal suits, a mistake, the kind of mistake made by people who understood the idea of blending in without understanding the execution. In a busy transit station in November, in Ocao, the 2 men in identical charcoal suits standing at a coffee cart without coffee look like exactly what they are. People waiting for someone specific. They were in constant, subtle communication, not speaking, but tracking. The small adjustments of posture that people who work together learn to read. Rael kept Mira to his left side, slightly behind him. "Did your mother have a bag with her?" he asked. "A big brown one," Mira said, "with a buckle that clicks twice when you close it. She says the sound is reassuring." "What does reassuring mean?" "It means it makes you feel safe," she said, with the patient tone of someone who has explained this before. "And what does your mother look like?" Mira reached into her turtle backpack, which she managed with some difficulty while walking, nearly walking into a man pulling a suitcase, or catching herself with impressive balance, and produced a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up with both hands, presenting it the way a small person presents something important. It was a crayon drawing. A woman with large round glasses, silver-white hair that Mira had colored in layered strokes, a coat with big buttons. Underneath, in a child's labored, careful printing, "Mom, Nadia." Rael looked at the drawing for 2 seconds longer than was necessary. "She draws," Mira said. "But mostly she writes. She's working on a book about a turtle who learns to fly." "Turtles can't fly," Rael said. "That's the point of the story," Mira said. "The turtle doesn't know that yet." He bought her a pastry from the bakery 2 stalls down. She considered the display case with the gravity of someone making a consequential decision and asked for the one with apricot jam, specified that she did not want powdered sugar because it went up her nose, and then settled at a small table near the window with the satisfaction of a person who has navigated a complex situation successfully. She opened her notebook immediately. "What is that?" he asked. "My detective notebook." She smoothed the cover with both palms. It had a magnifying glass drawn on it in blue marker, slightly lopsided, entirely confident. "My mother says detectives write everything down because memory is unreliable under stress. The act of writing slows you down enough to notice what you actually saw versus what you think you saw." He watched her write. Last scene, flower kiosk, brown bag, double-click buckle, gray coat, silver hair, round glasses. She underlined silver hair twice, apparently for emphasis. He thought about the men in charcoal suits. He thought about who had sent them and why. He thought about the name on the list, a name he had been given in an operational file 3 weeks ago, accompanied by a photograph and a dossier and a set of instructions that he had read with the professional detachment he had cultivated over many years. Nadia Voss, formerly employed as a contract intelligence analyst for Helix Meridian, the parent entity above the Meridian Group, for 6 years before resigning under what the file euphemistically described as voluntary termination with mutually agreed compensation. What the file did not describe, because no file ever would, was what Nadia Voss had spent the final 18 months of that employment doing. She had been documenting, cross-referencing, building, with the meticulous patience of someone who understood how these things were buried, a record of financial transfers connecting 3 European governments, a private military logistics network, and a series of events in 4 countries that had officially been attributed to everything except the people who had actually caused them. She had written it all down. Not digitally, she was too smart for that. And she had worked with these people long enough to know exactly how thoroughly digital records could be reached. She had written it by hand, in a manuscript that was currently located somewhere that nobody from Meridian had been able to determine despite 3 years of looking. And now Meridian had decided that the manuscript was less important than the person who had written it. Because dead women don't give interviews. And here was her daughter, sitting across from a man who had been sent to ensure that both the woman and the manuscript vanished, eating apricot pastry and underlining silver hair twice in her detective notebook. Rael's phone vibrated. He let it go to silence. "My mother says," Mira said without looking up from her notebook, "that the bravest thing a person can do is keep moving when they're afraid. Because afraid means it matters." "Are you afraid?" Rael asked. She looked up at him, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "A little," she said. "But that's okay. That just means finding her matters." A pause. "Are you afraid of anything?" The question landed in a place he hadn't been expecting. However, he sat with it for a moment, the way he had learned to sit with unexpected things, and then said, "I used to think I wasn't. I think that was the problem." She nodded, as if this were a perfectly reasonable and even expected answer. "My mother says people who aren't afraid of anything have usually stopped caring about anything. She says that's very sad." He didn't respond to that. He said, "Do you have a family? Besides your mother?" "Just us. But my mother says family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up." She looked at him steadily. "You showed up?" He had no answer for that. So he said, "We need to move." At the door of the bakery, a station official intercepted them, middle-aged, radio on his chest. The manner of a man who has spent 2 decades watching human distress and developed, despite everything, a genuine instinct for when something required his attention. He looked at Mira. He looked at Rael. He said, "Is this child with you?" "She's separated from her mother," Rael said, with the calm precision of a man who has navigated bureaucratic processes under circumstances significantly more difficult than this one. "Her mother's name is Nadia Voss, last seen at the Central Flower Kiosk approximately 30 minutes ago. Gray coat, brown bag with a double-click buckle, silver-framed round glasses, silver-white hair." The radio was already in the official's hand. He stepped aside and began transmitting. And within 90 seconds, the station's PA system was carrying a clear, measured announcement through every corridor. "Nadia Voss, please make your way to the Central Information Desk." The men in charcoal suits heard it. Rael watched one of them touch his earpiece. The other turned in a slow scan of the main concourse, professional and unhurried. They would not move now. Not with a station official involved. Not with a child in a red coat standing under the fluorescent lights of the information desk, visible to a minimum of 8 cameras and every person in the main hall. The public nature of the situation was its own protection, for now. He calculated 15 minutes, maybe 20 if the official stayed engaged. He sat with Mira on the bench nearest the information desk, and she taught him a game she had invented involving sugar packets from the condiment stand and a paper napkin she had divided into a grid with her red crayon. The rules were layered and changed slightly every 2 rounds, in ways Rail suspected were not accidental. "Yuck, you're cheating," he said, after she removed his second-to-last sugar packet, using a move she had not previously announced was legal. "I'm adapting," she said firmly. "My mother says the difference between cheating and adapting is whether you're hurting someone else in the process." "And are you hurting me?" She looked at his remaining sugar packet, back at him. "Probably a little," she admitted, with the refreshing honesty of someone who is 5 and has not yet learned to soften every uncomfortable truth. "But only a little." He almost smiled. He caught it approximately 1 second before it arrived. He was watching the East Corridor entrance when she appeared. He recognized her before he had consciously processed the identification. Because recognition, when it matters, operates faster than thought. Although the woman who emerged from the East Corridor crowd was moving with a particular controlled urgency. Not running, but not quite walking either. The specific gait of someone who had trained themselves not to run, even when everything in them said to run. She wore a gray coat with large buttons, round glasses with silver frames. Her hair, silver white, slightly escaped from whatever she had put it into, exactly as Mira had drawn it. Was at once precisely the way it had been described to him, and somehow entirely different from the photograph in the operational file. She was scanning exits before she scanned for her daughter. Old training, still active. Mira saw her at the same moment he did. The notebook closed. The sugar packets scattered across the napkin grid. And then Mira was off the bench and running. Not with the careful deliberateness she had moved with all evening, but with the full desperate speed of a 5-year-old who has been brave for a long time and is now done being brave and simply needs to reach the one person who makes the world make sense. Mama. And the woman's face, which had been controlled, contained, tactical, broke open completely. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the concourse, coat pooling around her on the station floor, and caught Mira in both arms and held her with the grip of someone who has spent the last half hour in a controlled internal terror that they are only now allowing themselves to feel fully. Rail stood. He waited. After a long moment, Nadia Voss looked up over her daughter's shoulder and found him. The recognition was immediate, mutual, and layered with things that would take longer than this moment to name. She had never seen his face in person, but she had spent enough years in proximity to people who operated the way he operated to know the shape of such a man immediately. The stillness, the positioning, the way his eyes moved. And she knew, looking at him, that he had made a choice. She just didn't yet know why. She stood. She kept one hand on Mira's shoulder. "You were sent by Meridian," she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. A statement of fact offered as an opening. "Yes." "To find me?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "And instead, you bought my daughter a pastry and let her beat you at a game she made up on the spot." She cheated. She always cheats. A beat. Yeah, why? He had been asking himself the same question since minute 22 on bench 17. He still didn't have an answer that he fully trusted. He said, "There are 2 men in charcoal suits near the east platform who are not me and cannot be reasoned with by sugar packet games. We have approximately 8 minutes before the public situation here stops protecting you." She absorbed this without any visible fracture. Analyst training, deeply embedded. "What do you suggest?" "There's a cafe behind the postal kiosks. Staff access entrance, no cameras on the interior. Warm. Mira can sit down properly. We have a conversation." She looked at her daughter. Mira, still pressed against her side, who had already picked up her turtle backpack and was watching both adults with the patient watchfulness of a child who has learned that adults sometimes need a moment to agree on things. "Okay," Nadia said. 8 minutes. The cafe was small. 4 tables, a counter, a proprietor who looked at Rail with the particular expression of someone who has made a long career of not asking questions and intends to continue. Cardamom. burned milk, the specific warmth of a small enclosed space that has been heated all day. They took the corner table, the one with a sight line to the door, because Rael reached it first, and Nadia, upon seeing where he sat, nodded almost imperceptibly. "You watch the entrance," she said, settling Mira beside her. "I always watch the entrance." "So do I." She looked at him across the table. "How long have you been with Meridian?" "Long enough to know what they do to people who don't complete assignments." "Then you understand what you're choosing." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Around them, Mira had opened her notebook and begun drawing with a focus that suggested she was giving the adults privacy while remaining close enough to hear everything, which Rael respected as a strategy. Nadia said, "Why?" The same question. He had been asked it twice now. This time, he owed her a real answer. He was quiet for a moment. Then, 2 years ago, a city I won't name, there was an assignment, a man, a specific target, standard parameters. His file was complete. What his file did not include, what I discovered on site, was that he had 2 daughters, 8 and 11. They were home. She waited without speaking. I filed a false completion report, told Meridian he had already relocated, bought him time. He paused. They found him eventually, regardless. But I've thought about those extra months, whether they counted, whether the time a family got that they didn't know they'd been given, whether it was worth what it cost. He looked at the table. I think it was. I think it had to be. Nadia was very still. And tonight? Tonight I sat on bench 17 for 43 minutes. I watched the exits. I watched the men they sent as backup. And I decided that whatever it costs me, I am not going to be the reason a 5-year-old in a turtle backpack grows up without her mother. Mira pushed her notebook across the table without looking up. On the open page, she had drawn 3 figures. A tall one in a gray coat, a medium one with round glasses, and a small one with a turtle backpack. Underneath, "My family today." Neither adult spoke for a moment. Then Rael said, "The 847 leaves from platform 9, not 7. They'll be watching 7. Use the interior walkway near the postal kiosks to approach from the south end of the platform. Don't stop. Don't check the board. The train terminates in Dresden. From Dresden, you do not go where you have told anyone you intended to go." Nadia was watching him with the careful attention of someone recalibrating. "And you?" "I'm going to go have a conversation with 2 men in charcoal suits." "That isn't a conversation." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. They'll send more after. They always do. But there's a window between when more are dispatched and when more arrive. That window is usually 72 hours, and that's enough time for someone who knows how to disappear to do it thoroughly." She reached into her coat and wrote on the back of a receipt. A city, a street address, a name, a phone number. She slid it across the table. "A safe address," she said. "A woman named Petra. She knows me as a writer, nothing else. If you ever—" She stopped, started again. "You're burning something significant to help us. You should have somewhere to land." He looked at the receipt. He picked it up and put it in his coat pocket. Mira tugged his sleeve. He looked down at her. "Will we see you again?" she asked. He wanted to give her an honest answer. He said, "I don't know." She considered this with great seriousness. Then she opened her detective notebook, tore out a page with careful deliberateness, and held it out to him. And it was the crayon drawing of her mother, my mom, Nadia. The one she had shown him at the flower kiosk 2 hours and a lifetime ago. Round glasses, silver hair, coat with big buttons, drawn with the confident inaccuracy of someone who sees what matters about a person and renders exactly that. "So, you remember her?" Mira said. He took the drawing, folded it once, carefully, and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest. Platform 9 was quieter than the main concourse. The silver train already breathing steam into the cold air, doors open, a handful of passengers boarding in the unhurried way of people who trust that the train will wait for them. Rael stood at the platform barrier and watched them come through the south entrance. Mira first, turtle backpack and red coat. Then Nadia half a step behind, her eyes already finding the doors, calculating the distance, the timing. They reached him. Nadia stopped and looked at him. People who have been through the same kinds of things understand each other in ways that don't always require words. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. "The one on the left is faster than he looks," she said. "Just so you know." "I know, I noticed." Mira held up both arms. He hesitated, half a second, the ghost of a hesitation, and then crouched down and let her hug him. She was small and warm and smelled like apricot pastry and crayon wax, and the particular clean smell of a child who has been very brave for a long time. She pulled back and looked at him with the directness that had been his first impression of her, and apparently was simply how she moved through the world. "Turtles can fly," she told him. "They just need to find the right bird." He watched them board. He watched the doors close. He watched the train begin to move, slowly at first, building, the cars sliding past him in sequence, the lights of each window a brief warm rectangle against the dark, until there was nothing but track and cold air and the distant PA voice cycling through arrivals and departures in 3 languages. Then he turned and walked toward platform 7. The man on the left was indeed faster than he looked. But fast is not the same as experienced, and experienced is not the same as willing. Rael had stood in rooms with men who were truly willing to go all the way. He could identify them in the first 3 seconds of a confrontation. These men were not. They were enforcers, deployed to apply pressure, to box in, to force a completion. Not they were not operators. He spoke before either of them did. "Walk away. Tell them the trail went cold. Tell them she wasn't on any manifest. You go home tonight. That's the offer." The younger one said, "We have our orders." "So did I," Rael said. And he said it with the absolute, unperformed weight of someone who means exactly what they are saying and has nothing left to lose by saying it. The older one looked at him for a long moment. He was experienced enough to recognize what he was looking at. He put his hand on the younger one's arm. They walked away. Rael stood at the empty end of platform 7 for a while. He listened to the station, the announcements, the distant crowd, the particular hollow echo of a large enclosed space at the edge of winter. He breathed. And he looked at the track where the 847 had been and was no longer. Then he took out his phone and dialed a number he had memorized 3 years ago and never used. A woman answered on the second ring. "It's Rael Domen," he said. "I need to come in from the cold." 3 years passed. Not cleanly, not in a straight line, not with the narrative tidiness of a story that knows where it's going and moves briskly toward it. 3 years passed the way actual time passes, incrementally, unevenly, with long stretches that seemed to mean nothing and smaller moments that turned out to mean everything. Rael spent 8 months providing information to the people he had called from platform 7. Information that proved useful in ways he was not always told about, and occasionally damaging to organizations that had grown accustomed to operating as though accountability were something that happened to other people. Then he stopped doing that too. He found a small apartment in a coastal city in Western Europe. He learned to cook, badly at first. Then, with the gradual competence of someone who has discovered that the repetitive attention required by cooking is, in fact, restful rather than boring. He ran in the mornings along the harbor. He read books, which he had not done with any pleasure since before he was 22, and had still believed that the life he was choosing would eventually feel like something other than what it was. He still watched the entrance of every room he entered. Some habits do not leave. They change shape, lose their urgency. You become something more like instinct than anxiety. He was learning the difference. The package arrived on a Wednesday in November, 3 years and 4 months after Platform 7. No return address. The postmark was from a city in western France that he recognized immediately. The city whose name Nadia had written on the back of a train station receipt, while Mira drew 3 figures in a detective notebook. He set the package on his kitchen table and looked at it for a moment before he opened it. He was aware, in the way that people who have survived many things become aware of significant moments as they arrive. that this was one. Inside was a book. Slim. A matte cover. The kind that quality small publishers use when they believe in what they're releasing. On the cover, a turtle in midair, improbably aloft, on wings that no biologist would endorse, spread wide against a sky that was somehow both nighttime and warm. The illustration had the specific quality of something drawn by someone who knows exactly what they want to say and says it without apology. The title, in clean, careful lettering, The Turtle Who Learned to Fly, by Nadia and Mira Voss. He turned it over. A description on the back. A turtle who has always believed she cannot fly, who meets a small, persistent red bird who absolutely refuses to accept this as a fixed fact. And what happens across the course of one very long, very cold night when they decide to try anyway. And below, in small text, for everyone who waited on bench 17. He opened to the dedication. It said, for D, who showed up, and for the man who stayed. He sat down. He read the book in one sitting, 40 minutes. It was technically a children's book. Short sentences, vivid illustrations, a story that moved with the clean directness of something that knows exactly what it wants to say and refuses to be deflected. The turtle was stubborn, afraid, absolutely convinced that flight was for other animals, and that the red bird's certainty was a form of cruelty, because it raised a hope that could only end in falling. The red bird was 5 years old in bird years, which meant she was impossible and certain, and completely unwilling to allow the turtle the comfort of her own limitations. Over the course of one winter night, in a very large, very cold train station. And here, Rail stopped reading for a moment and looked at the harbor, and then started again. The turtle learned something, not about flying, about what she had been willing to lose in order to stay safe. The last page showed the turtle in the air. The illustration was honest. She was not graceful. She was awkward and wide-eyed and suspended at an altitude that should have been impossible. And the red bird was right there beside her, not carrying her, just there. And below them, growing smaller, the lights of a station at night. He found a folded note tucked inside the back cover. Child's handwriting. Older than he remembered it being, the letters more deliberate, the spelling almost entirely reliable. It said, I told you turtles can fly. You were the bird the whole time. M. Below that, in different handwriting, measured, precise, the hand of someone who has spent years choosing words carefully and still does. We are well. She asks about you. She has been asking since the night you put us on that train, and I have told her, each time, the truth. That some people protect from a distance, and that distance is not the same as absent. I hope that was the right thing to tell her. I hope wherever you are, you have somewhere warm. I hope you found somewhere to land. N. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time after he finished reading. Not because he didn't know what he felt, but because he did. And feeling it fully required a moment of stillness that he was, it turned out, finally capable of. He placed the book on the windowsill, the sill that looked out over the harbor, where the morning was just beginning to go silver and gray. Beside it, he placed the crayon drawing. My mom, Nadia. Silver hair, round glasses, coat with big buttons. He could drawn by a 5-year-old who had decided on bench 17 that a man sitting very still was worth talking to. He made coffee. He sat by the window. He watched the light come in over the water and thought about a turtle who had not known she could fly and a red bird who had never considered that she might be wrong. He had spent 15 years learning to wait, to compress himself into stillness while the world moved around and through him, to occupy the space between one thing and the next without being touched by either. He had been good at it. He had been, in that particular skill, exceptional. But sitting in the early morning light with a turtle book on his windowsill and a child's note in his hand, he understood. Not for the first time, but for the first time without any remaining resistance. That he wasn't waiting anymore, that he hadn't been waiting for some time. He had arrived, quietly and without announcement, at something he would once have called ordinary, and now understood was the thing everything else had been keeping him from. He was here, He was present. The light was coming in. It was enough. If this story stayed with you, if there was a moment in here where you forgot to breathe, leave it in the comments. Tell me which moment got you. And if you want to be here for the next one, you know what to do. We'll see you then.